We finally did it. We reached the Hamilton part of the school year. Chapter 5, Section 1, 2, 3, and 4, all about the American Revolution, the events leading up to it. Chapter 6 will be the actual events during the American Revolution, the war, and how America becomes America, which we will be able to listen to a lot of different Hamilton parts because it really does follow the actual American Revolution, rather historically accurate as well, and it is extremely entertaining. And a major part of this is taxation without representation, the entire title of Section 1, which I will usually write, tax without rep. And we've been talking about this since day one. Republic, representation, representing the public is what the colonists are all about, and the British government is not doing that. This essential question goes back to the Section 4 of Chapter 4 with the French and Indian War. You have William Pitt saying that they're going to pay for this war that the colonists won basically for them, and then immediately going back on that, and this is them, the British government, taxing the American people without representation. This is why the colonists want to rise up and have their own revolution. And there's a lot of things on this section and in this chapter that come up again in later chapters down the road. Chapter 7 is about the making of the Constitution and how the events that happened to the colonists, they wanted to make sure would never happen again, that their government would never take advantage of them again. So when we look at different things like the writs of assistance, that will definitely be on our test, that is something that they put in as an amendment to make sure that that never happens again. The Sugar Act and the Stamp Act, two different sets of taxes, definitely on the test. Patrick Henry will be on the test. He's one of the first founding fathers that stands up and says, we're not going to deal with this anymore. Sam Adams and the Sons of Liberty are not on this test specifically, but they are a key part of this, where Sam Adams is the founding father that kind of gets everyone riled up and uses propaganda to join him, and he uses the Sons of Liberty as a basically kind of a terrorist organization against the British government to run around and burn things to the ground. And we're going to get into what a boycott is. We're going to get into Declaration Acts and Township Acts. The Declaration Act is definitely on the test, and that's the part where the British government basically puts their fist down and says, this is what we're going to do. We have full control over you. We're declaring that we own you and we're allowed to do whatever we want. And basically, everything on entire Chapter 5 can just be summed up with angry colonist face, because everything that the British do to the colonists pushes them further and further and further to the edge of revolution, which we will eventually get to. And if you've listened to the Hamilton soundtrack, is all filled throughout the entire first act with the American Revolution and the different historical aspects of that. And it all goes back to that French and Indian War, where the British had gained territory, but they refused to let the colonists go into this land. You had that proclamation of 1763 that told the colonists they had to stay on the coast. They were not allowed to benefit from having that new land. And the British need to protect their new lands. They're not letting the colonists move there. They're trying to not make the Native Americans more mad at them. They're trying to make sure, ensuring a market for British goods and controlling trade. All of these things are guaranteeing the British money and not the colonists. They're telling the colonists they are not real British people. They're just British colonists. Therefore, they don't get a say in anything, and they don't get a piece of that pie. They don't get all of that money. So this is this proclamation of 1763, as we talked about at the end of Chapter 4, is that one of those two major things that really makes the Americans mad and starts pushing them towards revolution, pushes them towards making their own country. And the British wanted to place 10,000 troops in the colonies to protect their money, but they didn't have any money to pay for the troops. So they also had, they need money for this, to pay for these troops. They also have a massive debt from the French and Indian War. This is all thanks to William Pitt, the guy who said the colonists would not have to pay for it, but now they're going to. So in order to protect their assets, in order to help pay off the war debt that they had racked up, in the French and Indian War, the British issue new taxes on the colonies, and they're going to enforce all of them very strictly. They don't have any money, so what they're going to do is they're going to raise taxes, which will give them money to pay off that debt. The problem is they're throwing all of these taxes on the colonists, who are not allowed to move on to the new land. They're not allowed to be a part of making more money. They're basically told to sit and stay where they are. They're going to have babysitters come and stand in the middle of their colonies and make sure they keep paying their taxes. They're going to have troops come live with them, and we're going to go over that as well, and how that becomes an amendment. So all of this stuff, once again, is just the British making the colonists more and more angry, to the point where they're willing to revolt. And we're going to talk about how they get to the point where they're so willing to revolt, they're so willing to fight this war, that they're actually willing to die for this cause, which is something that's really hard to defeat. When someone's willing to die to win, that's something that is almost impossible to stop. They're willing to give up everything in order to win their battle with you. And they immediately, the British, start making a whole bunch of various laws that the colonists need to follow, yet they are not very pleased with. What the colonists were doing to avoid paying taxes was they would smuggle goods in. So this is basically just them sneaking things in across borders. They're sending boats through darkness. They're having underground markets. That way the British can't collect taxes. So in order to help stop this, the British set up something called a Vice Admiralty Court, and it was a court that had no jury. And if you remember back to when we talked about New Jersey becoming a colony at first, they were the ones that offered this whole you can have a jury thing, where we're back to now that the British can set up a judge, and the British can say, you definitely were smuggling, you're going to jail, even without having proof of that. And there's just going to be one guy, and it's a guy that's British, who's telling you that what you're doing is illegal, even though it might not be. And this eventually becomes part of our Fifth Amendment, our Fifth and Sixth Amendments, where we talk about how we have today a jury that is a trial we get a trial that is a jury of our peers that gets to decide whether we are guilty or not, instead of just having one guy decide it. The other part that is definitely on the test is a writ of assistance. And you may know this by another name today. Back then it was a writ of assistance. Today we would call this a warrant, where if you watch any cop shows, they always say, do you have a warrant to come search whatever it is that we're searching? And it basically allowed any officer to enter any location to search for smuggled goods. And they don't even really have to have any type of evidence that I'm smuggling goods. They can just say, I have a writ of assistance, and I can come into your house and I can search for smuggled goods. The problem is how do you know what's smuggled and what's not? I could just have goods in my house. I could just have sugar. I could just have tea. And no one's going to know whether I smuggled it or not. And because the British are all about trying to make money, they would say, I have a writ of assistance, I'm coming into your house, and they could just say everything in your house is smuggled, or everything on your boat is smuggled, and it's all illegal, so I'm going to take it. And these were two major things, which we have today, an amendment where it's against illegal search and seizure of property. So that's one of those things that the British did to the colonists that they wanted to make sure would never happen ever again. So these two things, writs of assistance, vice admiralty courts, making colonists angry. They are very furious at the situation. They do not like that they're being taken advantage of. Remember, the British had given them freedom, and now they're taking it back, and the colonists are not happy about it. And the major one for this is a writ of assistance is on this test, because of the fact that they literally could just walk in your house and say, that is an illegal product, and I'm going to take it from you. Today, if someone's going to be coming and searching your house, they need to have a warrant, and that warrant needs to have evidence. And we're going to talk about a little bit how if someone thinks I stole a TV, and they want to come in my house, and they have a warrant that says they're there for a TV. They're looking for a specific stolen TV. And they come into my house, and I just have a whole bunch of other stolen stuff. They can't take that stolen stuff. They need to go get another warrant for that specific the other stolen goods that are in my house. but they can only take the stolen TV. I can only be found guilty for the stolen TV. So they need to have specific warrants. They can't just come in and take whatever they want anymore. And to try to stop smuggling, and that's what the key of this is, and this is a little bit weird, because they're lowering a tax on molasses. And molasses is really just sugar, and they call this the Sugar Act. So this happens 12 years, 1764. We're going to go to Revolution in 1776, so 12 years before that for that year, we now have the British attempting to lessen a tax. They're trying to make the tax cheaper, that way they'll stop smuggling. And this kind of makes sense, where if there's the opportunity that you could go to jail for smuggling, where if I can make the price worth it, where that's not worth the risk. So let's say that I'm smuggling milk into school. So if you go and make up prices, let's say that milk at school costs 50 cents. But I am smuggling in illegal milk, and my price is 10 cents. So you're going to buy my milk from me for 10 cents because it's 40 cents cheaper than the cafeteria. So instead, you come to my room, and in my closet, I got milk. It's only 10 cents. You're willing to take the risk. I'm willing to take the risk that for those extra 40 cents, I'm willing and you're willing to take the chance that we could go to milk jail because of the fact that that's so much cheaper than the school's price. But let's say that the school then says, with the Sugar Act, we're going to cut this price down to 25 cents. So now the difference is only 15 cents, and you can figure out which one is better for you. Are you still willing to take the risk, or are you willing to pay 15 cents more for the same product but not have the risk of going to jail? So the Sugar Act is attempting to lower a tax in order to say, this product is the same as the smuggled products, but you're not going to go to jail, and it's only a little bit more expensive. But this still angers the colonists. This angers a lot of very everyday colonists. A lot of sugar back then was expensive, so a lot of everyday citizens couldn't even afford sugar, so this didn't affect them at all. But they still say that this is violating their rights as English citizens. This is a tax without their representation. No one in the colonies was able to go to Britain and say, we don't like this tax, we want you to choose something else. But instead, it's always the colonists just getting taxes thrown on them without having their representation. They're not having the freedom that they once had. And then the writs of assistance basically made their houses and their boats open at any time. And then the Vice Admiralty courts, that you had no jury, that basically it was one guy deciding that you were going to be guilty. Once again, very, very angry. It's probably going to be on every single slide. Throughout Chapter 5, the colonists are being driven to that point of revolution. And then this is also key. We've flipped this since then. Back then, you had to prove your innocence. Today, we say that you're innocent until proven guilty. That means that the government has to have undeniable proof that you committed a crime, whether it be you on videotape or multiple witnesses doing something. But back then, you had to prove your innocence. So if someone wanted to say you were smuggling milk, you had to have some type of proof that you weren't. And it's really difficult to do that. Like, you couldn't just videotape everything you did. You literally would have to have, like, receipts for every single thing that you ever bought or sold. That way you could always prove that you were innocent. Today we flip that, and it's not your fault and your problem to prove your innocence anymore. It's that you are going to be assumed innocent until proven guilty. Back then it was a lot more difficult to get away with being charged with a crime and becoming free, because you were the one that was having to prove that you were in fact innocent, that you did not do the thing they were claiming you did. And then eventually, and this is kind of the kicker, this is something that really makes a lot of people mad. A lot of people used paper. Parliament passes a Stamp Act in 1765. We're 11 years now away from the official revolution. And it was a tax on basically all printed materials. And everyone basically needs paper. And this would be like me giving you a 15-page notebook and a whole bunch of review sheets and a whole bunch of a test that's 4 pages long and telling you that you need to get a stamp. I'm going to put my stamp on your piece of paper and you have to pay me 50 cents for that stamp. And I'm telling you, you have to use the paper. I'm making you use the paper and I'm making you pay money to do it. On every piece of paper, you have to pay me 50 cents. So whenever there was a piece of paper of any printed material, you would have to go to a British officer, and then the British officer, after you paid that tax, would stamp your paper. He would give you a stamp. That's why it's called the Stamp Act. And this was something that affected a lot of colonists directly, that this is something that is happening without their consent. Once again, taxation without representation. They are not being allowed to have a say in this set of rules that are happening. And this would be very similar to the way that you guys operate, that you operate in a middle school that has rules that no one really ever asked you what they were. You may have rules at home that no one ever asked you what you thought about them or the way that you would like. The dress code's a big one. No one probably asked you guys about the dress code, and you always want to revolt and take back the dress code for yourselves, or at least get some say in it. And that's something that you can relate to, that these British government officials are making laws for a group of people without ever asking them. And just like the colonists, your face probably looks like this when rules are made for you. Make those eyebrows go as vertical as possible. It's all in the eyebrows of their anger. The first founding father that really stands up, one of the first, is a guy named Patrick Henry. And he's going to have a quote that we're going to look at later on that says, this very famous quote, it's on the wall in the classroom, "Give me liberty or give me death." And it's that attitude that I am willing to die for what I am fighting for, and I'm willing to give up my life to help and win. So that way our kids, the people that are going to come after us, will have an opportunity to have a better life than what we are currently living. He is the one that says that only in the House of Burgesses in Virginia, so the government in Virginia, the House of Government in Virginia, they pass a resolution, which is a law. They say that we're going to follow this law that says that only the people of Virginia have the right to tax the people of Virginia. So he's saying tax with representation is allowed, that we're willing to pay taxes as long as we get a say in what those taxes are and how much they are. And then Sam Adams goes the opposite route. Sam Adams starts a group called the Sons of Liberty. They're basically the burn everything group. He basically gets a whole bunch of young guys together that are kind of a part of the government, not really a part of the government, and instead of trying to make change using government, he makes change through complete chaos. And that's all really Sam Adams is trying to do. Sam Adams is trying to scare the British into giving them what they want. So they would burn effigies of tax collectors, which is basically a scarecrow, stuff some cloth together with some hay, and then you would light them on fire. You would destroy the houses of royal officials, so that way basically you're making anybody that's trying to work for the British government scared for their lives. You're going to burn down their houses. You're going to threaten their lives and their families. And that's what the Sons of Liberty really does at first. And we're going to talk about how we have changed the way that we make change. Every once in a while, and it's been happening a lot recently, there are complete just riots in some cities. And a lot of it is over the police shootings, where there's a riot in Ferguson a couple years ago. There was the riot in Baltimore last year. You have these people that are rioting and doing the stuff that Sam Adams did. They're willing to burn down and destroy things to try to make change. But what we've done since the American Revolution is once we make the Constitution, we say, you can go the Patrick Henry route, use the government, use your vote in order to make change. The Sam Adams way of burning everything to the ground doesn't really help anymore. That's not a good way of making change. And if you remember, back to the Albany Plan of Union in Section 3 of Chapter 4, you had Ben Franklin saying we should all be working together, and 9 colonies end up meeting in New York City, and they call this the Stamp Act Congress. And anytime that we get a Congress, you can basically think of it as a meeting. So this was the Stamp Act meeting, and it was there to draft a petition to the king and the British Parliament. And what they did is they drafted up a piece of paper that says that the colonies could be taxed by their own assemblies. Basically, they said taxation with representation. That the British are giving them without representation. We are willing to pay taxes if you let us have a say in them, what they are and how much they are. And this is the first time that the colonies really start to group together. They realize that Benjamin Franklin was right. The Iroquois Confederacy plan was correct. They need to be working together as one fist instead of just as individual fingers trying to poke someone. They're going to do much more damage and have much more impact if they're all going to work together. So what they start doing is they start getting together protests. They start getting together boycotts. And a boycott is when you refuse to buy something. So this would be if, say, a company does something that you don't like, whether it is that they support a cause that you think is wrong, then you just don't buy things from that company anymore. And that happens a lot, where different companies have certain religious beliefs, or they say their CEOs say something about a group of people, and a whole bunch of people will then boycott that product. And when you boycott a product, that means those people lose money. And that's the whole thing, is the whole purpose of that is to make the person lose money. And if they lose enough money from your boycott, that maybe they will change. This would be similar to if, let's say, the school lunches were absolutely terrible. They were disgusting and no one wanted to pay money for them anymore. So if everyone just said, we're going to boycott buying lunch, we're all going to get together, no one in the school is going to buy lunch, and eventually the company that runs the lunches will keep losing money every day because they won't be able to sell any of their product, and then eventually maybe they will have lost so much money that they're willing to change the lunches to try to get you to come back and buy more stuff. The merchants all over the colonies signed things called non-importation agreements, which meant that no one would buy goods from Britain. And the British merchants end up losing so much business that they beg Parliament to repeal the Stamp Act. And repeal just means to cancel or get rid of. So their boycott worked so well that, let's get rid of, wrote that in the wrong order. It worked so well that the merchants went to the British government and said, you need to get rid of these various taxes the colonists are boycotting because we can't sell anything. So Parliament does repeal the law. They get rid of it. They cancel the law. So I just imagine that they're sitting there and Parliament's reading what they're going to do, and Parliament's reading from a piece of paper, and they say, good news, everyone. We're all going to get rid of all of these Stamp Act laws that the colonists are really angry about. And all of the colonists get really excited because they just won. They defeated the British, and they're going to be able to have taxes the way they want. But then in the next breath, the colonists hear about the Declaration Act, which is basically where they declare, we own you. The British say with the Declaration Act that we have the right to tax and make all decisions for you in all cases. That you are not real British citizens, you are just colonists of the British, you don't have any say in anything, and moving forward we will make whatever decisions we want, and this is something that really makes the colonists really mad. I don't even know if we can go any more vertical there with eyebrows before they just are perpendicular to the eyes. But this is 10 years before the official start of the American Revolution, where Britain basically says, we own you and there's nothing you can do about it. In the coming year and the coming years after that, Parliament passes what they call the Townshend Acts. And people say this differently. It could be Townshend, Townshend, Townshend. You can go with whatever it is that you feel comfortable with. I always say Townshend Acts. And basically it's a tax that applies to all imported goods. anything that's being brought into the country. Imported means into. So anything that is being brought into the colonies is going to be taxed, including glass, tea, paper. And instead of having you pay it once you're buying it, it's paid at point of entry. That means that the tax is paid right on the coast. Right when it's coming off of the boat, that tax needs to be paid, which means it's not very likely you're going to be able to smuggle any of these goods. This becomes a huge problem, which will lead to what we're going to get to at the Boston Massacre and the Boston Tea Party. This is throwing the colonists very close to that edge that they're willing to jump off of in order to get their freedom. And this, once again, angers the colonists because they're being taxed without representation. That they're saying, if you don't give us representation, we're going to freak out. That it's without representation. If you gave us representation, we would be totally fine. And another boycott forms. The colonists refuse to buy any of these goods, and they're starting to try to make all of these things on their own.